Hi, it's Zoe, and welcome to a special edition US election solo Sode. Like many, I have been pontificating on the election process and the election results. Now, why would a Canadian Australian living in Canberra, Australia, care about the US? Seems like maybe an obvious question, but I think it's worth answering. And as a leadership futurist, and those of us who think in systems, we know that whatever happens in the biggest democracy and economy of the world, it has ripple effects around the globe. And plus, I have family who live in the US and I care about what happens to them. So that's what the stakes are for me personally. And the stakes are similar, different, bigger for those of us listening in. So what I wanted to explore in this solo-sode is asking the big question about what could this mean? And next, what can we do next that would be better for us together? And I think the together part is really important because this bipartisanship, or this division, I should say, is not being helpful. So when we look at this lens through the lens of a futurist, what can we do about this? What should we think about this? I am tempted to look at the issue through a number of different lenses, a number of different maps of the territory, if you like, to try and make sense of what this could mean. There have been different reactions. And I think it's interesting to look at the different reactions to this event of electing Trump for a second term. And the reactions vary from catastrophe, disaster, moral outrage to vindication and exuberation. Exhilaration? Exuberance? I think those are the words. So how is it that we can have two vastly different reactions to this one particular event? I think for many, on the outrage side of things, the story goes something like, how could they? How could they elect a convicted felon, a potential rapist, a racist, a liar, narcissist? I'm just reading my list here, fascist, and the list goes on. Many personal attributes allocated to the personality of Trump. And then the other side of the coin is he's our hero. He's going to fix things up. I can tell you one thing, though, the moral outrage does not help us at all in moving forward. It just makes us feel bad. And on reflection, I think this moral outrage is something that Republicans or Trump supporters felt with the election of Biden and his administration and the changes that they put forward in the legislation. The moral outrage from that side was like, what are they doing to families? What are they doing to the future of our kids? What values are they putting forward that are so different to mine? And it felt like an existential crisis. And I think if we were to bridge the gap between these two worlds, noting that each of us had felt moral outrage through one lens or the other is something that we have in common. So when we have something in common, there's a way to actually build a bridge. So this moral outrage, I think, is interesting to tease apart. As a starting point, though, it doesn't help. So what could help in terms of making sense piece is using frameworks to attribute some meaning, to tease apart some meaning. And the first lens I applied to this was the lens of values. What were the different values on display in this election? And what I discovered is in doing that, it feels a little bit too binary. People value different things. The Democrats on one side, or those voting for the Harris-Walz ticket, valued togetherness, women's rights, feminism, social good. And it's not to say that those on the Trump-Vance side didn't also value that, but they valued different things more. And the different things they valued are strong economy and border security. So it looks like a values conflict in some ways. And to a certain degree, that's true. They may actually all value those things, but they just prioritize them differently. And I think that's useful to see as well. If we actually value the same things, but just order the priority different, we're going to act differently. I read another article this morning that talks about we pick our side because of however we were raised or whatever we gravitate to, and then we justify it after that. So we rationalize our emotional decisions. And we see us doing that as humans in all sorts of areas. You know, why did we pick the red sports car? We make up stories about why that was a justifiable choice. And we align all of our values. Any evidence to the contrary that the red sports car is not good for us, we spin and justify and fit into our worldview, our way of making sense of the world. And I think that also applies to bigger decisions like who we're going to vote for in the election. We have an idea of what we think is important, and then we rationalize all of our decisions to line up with that view to make it make sense for us, to be in integrity with our worldview. That's how some supporters justify or reconcile all the contradictory elements that you see in a candidate like Trump, and likewise all the conflicts that you see in a side like the Democrats. Their stance on Gaza, say, for example, is a heavy conflict with some of the ideologies that that party puts forward. So yes, what are we justifying in picking our horse that we're betting on? I think that's a really useful thing to keep in mind as we try and attribute meaning to the events. So that's the first lens, values. The second one I was looking at this through is like, okay, what could this mean? And I think one thing it could mean is that the Republicans were better at selling a story. Their story was more compelling than the Democratic side. So on the Trump side, we had the story of, I'm the hero, I will make it better, I can fix this. If we don't do anything, it's all going to hell in a handbasket. That story, that fear story, is very compelling, and it hit people where it matters most to them: their hip pocket, their financial security, and their sense of safety and security. Very powerful stories. The Democrat side was a story of hope, of aspiration, of together we are stronger and better, and justice. So the Democrat story was about a bigger us, and the Republican story was an us versus them. Which story is better? Not a helpful question. I think which story was more compelling? Well, we can see in the results which one was more compelling at this time and place. Now, it may be that the Democrat story might be more compelling later on down the track, but it just wasn't big enough to get people across the line. So the third lens through which I was looking at this situation to try and describe meaning was the leadership maturity lens. So I often look at individual trajectories, organizational trajectories through the lens of developmental leadership models, spiral dynamics, and ego leadership maturity. And what I saw at play there is that through each of the stages, there are different things that rise to the surface as being important to us. For the Republicans, or the Republican ticket, we saw the values of tribalism, of security really playing out. And security is an early stage leadership maturity value, feeling safe within our tribe. So tribalism and security and safety is pretty primal. It's one of the first things that we develop as a sense of self and identity that never leaves us. So each of these identities and values, they stay with us. They just have dialed down or dialed up importance depending on the circumstance in which we find ourselves. So tribalism and security, when that is threatened, becomes front and center, which is why Trump's story of I can save the day and we will fix this and we'll keep the others out is so powerful when we feel so insecure around our stability and security. So there's that component. So earlier stages of values being pushed and pulled up to the forefront of people's minds as they feel insecure and they don't have a lot of work and things look like they're downward spiraling, and they are in some cases. Certainly job prospects in many parts of the US are pretty poor and have been for a long time. The cost of living is universally going up everywhere, so that just puts additional pressure. So when we're in true survival, those values, that story, that lens becomes really significant for us. The other lens through which to look at this was more the Democratic lens, was looking at the importance of environmentalism, feminism, justice, equity, inclusion. These are later stage leadership maturity values that are in spiral dynamics. That's the green meme. And that's around in ego leadership maturity, that's the individualist or strategist stage, where we're looking at bigger picture sense of us and all the factors that affect us. So why are those things important and emotional for people? Because when we sit in environmentalism and feminism, we look at the repercussions of individual actions on the bigger picture. And we feel that threats to the environment will have a ripple effect that come to affect the individuals and all of us. Equally emotive as the survival memes. So when we have that sense of the environment and our associations internationally are under threat. We feel under threat. So it's a different kind of threat and a different kind of priority. So seeing the world through those two different lenses, sometimes it's very difficult to meet each other in the middle. If we understand that there's a common survival threat across each of those, we can stop seeing the other as other and see other humans as humans also concerned about survival. And I really think this selection is about survival through whatever lens and whatever story it's being expressed. That's our common humanity. And I think that's what we can kind of tie into and stop demonizing people who vote differently to us or think differently to us. It helps us open up a little bit of curiosity and compassion for our fellow humans about what's bothering them, what's keeping them up at night, and stay out of judgmentalism and righteousness, which is rife on both sides, I can tell you. So the other thing I was thinking about this, we've got these two different stages of worldviews and different value set and different senses of what survival actually means. And then you have the random one in there, Elon. I can't decide if Elon is a brilliant transformational magician at the extreme late stages of leadership maturity. It's one possibility. And the reason I think that might be the case is that Elon has long vindicated for a very long-term horizon the future of humanity and consciousness. That's behind his whole mission to colonize Mars. And its whole mission behind Tesla is to decarbonize the economy and to set up for a carbon-free system of the world, energy system of the world. And cars was the first entry point into that. So if he is still leading from that angle, then an alliance with Trump, who is likely selling the story that people want to buy, can get him into the halls of power. And he can see that the tariffs on Chinese import of electrical vehicles will increase uptake of Tesla vehicles because the Chinese counterparts will be too expensive. So it's a very smart strategy for him. I'm wrestling with this. I'm not wrestling with it. I'm playing with this potential story of Elon. So it's either Elon, the magical genius, or Elon, who has just gone bonkers with the susceptibility of power games. Equally possible. And I think at those later stages of leadership maturity, it's hard to decipher, actually. Are they bonkers or are they a magician? Jury's out. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to watch, and I'm remaining open to either one of those stories. So once we have these, so we had a look at the situation through three different lenses. One was leadership maturity, one was the stories that we tell, and the third one was the values dynamics. More importantly now is what next? What do we do next as humans? Moral outrage doesn't help us. Wringing hands and going, woe is me, and what will the world come to does not help. So what does help? System thinking helps, because when we start to see how integrated and interconnected we are, we can look at the hot points and be prepared for what's coming. So, there's no mystery around Trump's policies. We know that what he wants to put forward. So we can map out different potential future scenarios and prepare now for how that might affect our businesses, the environment, our social dynamics, and steer the course through that. I think that's a useful, proactive way of moving forward without histrionics and wailing, which, to be honest, is very tempting, but not helpful. Okay, I think the next thing is dealing with this idea of leadership maturity. And we come back to the fundamentals of what I said about that, is that it's all about survival issues, particularly in the earlier stages. This ostracization of us versus them creates oppositions, creates tension, creates a smaller world. So how do we counter that? Well, we start by actually lifting the safety and security of all people. How can we help more people get job security, food security, financial security, so that there is less of a tendency to say they are the problem, let's protect our own, so that there's less of a need for that because we get a sense of abundance and possibility. How do we work on a world where we do that? How do we work on a world where everybody is provided for? That's what I'm interested in doing, and that's what we can support. And certainly that's what I'm interested in doing with these charities that I support too. I support charities that have systemic interventions to help elevate base level across the board. So I support Men's Link because they are systemically focused on helping young men at disadvantage or at risk become pro-social young men. When you have pro-social young men, it reduces the likelihood of toxic male, toxic masculinity, and abuse of women later on down the track. So I think that is a really good investment in terms of helping develop pro-social young men. It's a systemic address of the chronic challenges that we face in that area. Another reason why I support another charity called the Smith Family, which is investment in education for young people, because education is the opportunity to better your financial and economic and social prospects. Not everybody has an equal opportunity to good education or even have the base level family experiences to take advantage of a good education. So supporting the Smith family in helping disadvantaged kids is something that I also believe in. My third focus of charity is around literacy, because reading is the gateway to education. Everybody should have the right to read. And I believe this so strongly. As a writer, as an author, I believe in the power of words to uplift and change minds. I believe in the power of words to show us potential futures, ones that we can aspire and build together. So focusing on literacy is something that I will be working hard in advocating for. So what's next for all of us? I think all of us can take civic responsibility for asking the questions, what can I do now to make the world a little bit better for another human being? When I can help uplift others, then I'm making a contribution. I think we can be more forthright in our political advocacy. We can look at encouraging greater transparency and ethical responsibility in governments and organizations. That ethical accountability and watchdog monitoring is essential for keeping our democracy and our institutions alive, healthy, and well. So I'm also encouraging you to get across those issues, assuming that you have your baseline needs met. And if that is being handled well, let's look towards the civic centers so that we can make a positive contribution there. So that's it. I'm coming to the end of my solo sode and my thoughts on the US election, and hoping for a better future, working towards a better future, and encouraging us all to stop demonizing other people and to start leaning into curiosity and wondering what's going on for those people who think differently to me. Where's our common ground? Where can I help bridge the gap and come to a better understanding so that we can work together for creating a safer, better, healthier, more sustainable, more economically prosperous, free, peaceful world. That's what I want, and I hope you want that too. In the meantime, live with grace, lead in service, live well, lead well.